Marlene Warren. On the morning of May 26, 1990, Marlene Warren answered the door of her Wellington, Florida home to find a cheerful figure standing on her porch holding carnations and balloons. The visitor wore a complete clown costume. "How nice," Marlene remarked to her son Joe Aarons. In the next instant, the clown raised a firearm and shot Marlene in the face before calmly walking back to a white Chrysler LeBaron and driving away. Marlene Warren had been married to Michael Warren, who owned Bargain Motors. The couple's relationship had experienced strain. Before the shooting, Marlene had told her son that if anything happened to her, his father would be responsible, a chilling premonition that would haunt investigators for decades. The Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate investigation. Detectives quickly learned that Michael Warren had been involved in a relationship with Sheila Keene, an employee at Bargain Motors. Witnesses came forward reporting they had seen Sheila purchasing clown costumes and balloons at local shops in the days before the shooting. Investigators traced the white Chrysler LeBaron to a rental connected to Michael Warren's business. Inside the abandoned vehicle, forensic technicians discovered orange fibers consistent with a clown wig and strands of brown hair. However, the DNA technology available in 1990 proved insufficient to extract usable profiles. The case quickly stalled despite compelling circumstantial evidence. Michael and Sheila married in 2002, relocating to Tennessee where they operated a restaurant. The couple appeared to have escaped justice while Marlene's family continued to seek answers. The breakthrough came in 2017 when advances in DNA analysis allowed forensic scientists to re-examine the hair evidence. The enhanced testing revealed a DNA profile that matched Sheila Keene Warren, providing the concrete physical evidence investigators needed. Palm Beach County detectives arrested Sheila at the Tennessee restaurant. During legal proceedings, Sheila maintained her innocence. Prosecutor Aleathea McRoberts presented the case, outlining how romantic rivalry had motivated the elaborate disguise and execution. However, concerns about case strength due to time passage led to plea negotiations. In 2023, Sheila Keene Warren entered a guilty plea to second-degree murder, resulting in a 12-year sentence. Throughout proceedings, Sheila's attorney Greg Rosenfeld maintained his client's position. He stated publicly, "As we've stated from the beginning, she did not commit this crime." Sheila Keene Warren was released from prison in 2024, after serving approximately 18 months. Joe Aarons expressed his continued belief that both Sheila and his father had been involved, though Michael Warren was never charged. The clown costume murder remains one of Florida's most bizarre homicide cases. The 33-year gap between crime and conviction demonstrates both investigator persistence and the transformative power of advancing forensic technology. While that case involved elaborate planning, another would reveal betrayal from an unexpected source. Linda Patterson Slotin. On the early morning of September 4th, 1981, 31-year-old Linda Patterson Slotin was found deceased in her Lakeland, Florida apartment. The perpetrator had entered through a window, leaving a palm print on the sill that would eventually prove crucial. Linda's sister, Judy Butler, discovered the horrific scene. She later described finding Linda. She was laying, instead of up and down on the bed, she was laying crossways. And at first I thought maybe she was asleep. And then I just started screaming. The Lakeland Police Department processed the scene meticulously, collecting biological evidence and documenting the palm print. Medical examiners determined that Linda had been strangled with a wire coat hanger. What made the case particularly haunting was the proximity of Linda's sons during the incident. Both boys had been sleeping in the small apartment. The investigation continued sporadically over the years. In 1999, DNA was successfully extracted from biological material collected at the scene, creating a genetic profile. The profile was entered into CODIS, but returned no matches. The breakthrough came through genetic genealogy. In 2019, genetic genealogist C.C. Moore uploaded the suspect's DNA profile to GED Match. The search generated matches to distant relatives, allowing investigators to construct family trees. The genealogical work pointed toward a shocking possibility: Joseph Clinton Mills, who had been 20 years old at the time. The revelation proved devastating for Linda's sons because Mills had served as Tim's youth football coach. Mills had been present in the boys' lives after their mother's death, maintaining contact with the family. To confirm the findings, detectives obtained a discarded piece of tape that Mills had touched. The DNA matched the profile from the crime scene, providing the physical evidence needed for arrest. Additionally, investigators matched the palm print from Linda's window to a print taken from Mills in 1984. When confronted, Mills offered an explanation investigators found unconvincing. He claimed consensual relations had gone wrong. Detective Russell Hurley rejected this account directly, telling Mills, "You purposely killed her. We're all sitting here, we know that." Mills had dropped Tim at home just hours before the incident. C.C. Moore stated, "I think this case made me the angriest out of the hundreds of cases I've been involved in, because what he did with her children there." In 2022, Joseph Clinton Mills pleaded guilty to first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. At sentencing, Jeff Slayton addressed Mills directly, asking the question that had haunted him for decades. Why? That's what I want to know. Why? She was a good person. Why would he do that? Tim Slayton told reporters, "I trusted this man. He was the last person in my brain I thought was gonna do it." Joseph Clinton Mills remains incarcerated in Florida. But across the country, another case would show how nature itself could preserve crucial evidence. Bobby Joe Oberholzer. On the evening of January 6, 1982, a massive winter storm descended on Summit County, Colorado. 29-year-old Bobby Joe Oberholzer and 22-year-old Annette Schnee were hitchhiking separately along the same stretch of highway during the blizzard. Both women vanished into the storm, picked up by someone whose identity would remain unknown for nearly 40 years. The discovery came swiftly for Bobby Joe. The following morning, her frozen body was found on Hoosier Pass. Investigators noted a zip tie restraining her wrist and, peculiarly, an orange sock lying near her body. The sock did not belong to Bobby Joe. Annette Schnee remained missing until July 1982, when remains were found in Sacramento Creek. Annette was wearing a single orange sock that matched the one found at Bobby Joe's scene. Deputy District Attorney Stephanie Miller later explained, "The orange sock becomes significant because when Annette got out of this vehicle, she didn't put on one of those orange socks." The matching socks definitively linked the two cases. The initial investigation faced numerous challenges. Detectives interviewed dozens of people, including motorists in the area during the storm. One interview stood out. Investigators spoke with Alan Lee Phillips, who had been rescued from a snowdrift on the same night the women disappeared. Phillips had been found in his vehicle, stuck in snow, suffering from a forehead gash when rescuers pulled him out. He explained he had gotten lost in the blizzard. Investigators noted his injury, but had no reason to connect him to the missing women. The case went cold for decades. In 2020, DNA extracted from a bloody glove found at Bobby Joe's scene was used for genetic genealogy analysis after a profile created earlier returned no matches in CODIS. In 2020, investigators uploaded the DNA profile to genealogy databases. The genetic genealogy work generated leads pointing toward Alan Lee Phillips. Investigators obtained a discarded item and extracted his DNA, which confirmed the match to the blood on the glove. Further investigation revealed Phillips had a prior conviction from 1973. The forehead injury took on new significance. Investigators theorized it could have resulted from a struggle with one of the victims. When Phillips was arrested in 2021, Park County Sheriff Tom McGraw announced, "I am honored to make this important announcement after nearly 40 years have passed since these murders took place." The trial in 2022 resulted in Phillips being convicted on 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of kidnapping. He was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms. However, in 2023, at age 72, Alan Lee Phillips died by his own hand while incarcerated. The case stood out not only for the coincidence of the perpetrator being rescued on the same night, but also for how a simple piece of evidence, an orange sock, had preserved the connection between 2 victims. Sometimes the truth emerges from within the family itself. Fawn Cox. On the morning of July 26, 1989, in Kansas City, Missouri, a family awoke to discover that 16-year-old Fawn Cox had not survived the night. The perpetrator had entered through her window, moving silently through the darkness. Her mother attempted to wake her, only to realize the terrible truth that she had been gone for a while. The Kansas City Police Department processed the bedroom thoroughly, collecting biological evidence and documenting the point of entry. Medical examiners determined Fawn had been both attacked and strangled, and biological material from the perpetrator was recovered. The personal nature of the incident and the fact that the perpetrator had targeted Fawn specifically in her own bedroom suggested someone who knew the family's home layout. Investigators interviewed family members, friends, neighbors, and anyone who had recently interacted with Fawn. Detectives found no obvious suspects among her acquaintances. The biological evidence represented the best hope for eventually identifying the perpetrator. The case remained active through the 1990s and into the 2000s. When DNA profiling became more sophisticated, forensic scientists developed a genetic profile from the biological evidence. This profile was entered into CODIS, but returned no matches. Decades passed with Fawn's family carrying the weight of unanswered questions. Her sister, Felisa Cox, and other family members never stopped seeking justice, regularly checking in with investigators. The breakthrough arrived in 2020 with genetic genealogy. Kansas City detectives partnered with forensic genealogists who uploaded the suspect's DNA profile to public genealogy databases. The genetic analysis generated matches to distant relatives, allowing investigators to construct family trees. The genealogical work led to a devastating conclusion. The DNA profile matched Donald Cox Jr., who had been Fawn's own cousin. Donald was 21 years old at the time of Fawn's death, and the family connection meant he would have been familiar with the household. The revelation that Fawn had been harmed by a relative added another layer of tragedy. However, the identification came with a significant limitation. Donald Cox Jr. had died in 2006 from an overdose, 14 years before investigators identified him. This meant there would be no arrest, no trial, and no opportunity for the family to confront him. When Kansas City Police announced the resolution in 2020, Sergeant Ben Caldwell expressed the department's relief. This one touched a lot of people because she was an innocent child who was murdered in her own bed. Fawn's sister, Felisa Cox, spoke about the mixed emotions. She told reporters, "It's a relief there's closure. The answers aren't always what we were asking for, but there's closure." The case highlighted both the power and limitations of genetic genealogy. While the technology successfully identified the perpetrator after 3 decades, it could not bring him to justice in a courtroom. For Fawn's family, the knowledge provided a form of closure, even if it came with a bitter taste of familial betrayal. The next case would demonstrate how even the smallest DNA sample could unlock decades of mystery. Crystal Lynn Beslanovich. In December 1995, the body of 17-year-old Crystal Lynn Beslanovich was discovered along the banks of the Provo River in Wasatch County. She had been struck repeatedly with granite rocks from the riverbank, and her body had been left in the cold water. Crystal had been living on the streets and supporting herself through means that brought her into contact with dangerous individuals. The Wasatch County Sheriff's Office processed the scene extensively, collecting the granite rocks and documenting the area. Investigators also discovered a cigarette butt near the scene that appeared recently discarded. In 1995, DNA analysis was available, but not as refined as it would become in later years. Detectives worked to reconstruct Crystal's final hours and identify who she had been with before her death. Her lifestyle meant she interacted with numerous people, many of whom operated on society's margins and were difficult to locate. The investigation developed several persons of interest, but lacked physical evidence needed to connect anyone definitively. The case eventually went cold. The breakthrough came from advances in DNA collection and analysis techniques. In 2013, forensic scientists used a vacuum-assisted DNA collection method on the granite rocks. This technique, known as touch DNA analysis, could extract genetic material from skin cells left behind when someone handled an object. The touch DNA analysis successfully recovered a genetic profile from the rocks, and that profile was run through criminal databases. The DNA matched Joseph Michael Simpson, a man with a prior conviction for murder who had been released on parole. Further investigation revealed Simpson had worked as a shuttle driver in the area where individuals engaged in street-level activities. To confirm the match, investigators obtained the cigarette butt collected 18 years earlier and analyzed it using modern DNA techniques. The genetic profile matched Simpson's DNA, providing a second piece of independent evidence. The case proceeded to trial in 2016, where prosecutors presented the DNA evidence alongside testimony about Simpson's prior conviction and his presence in the area. Defense attorneys challenged the reliability of touch DNA, arguing the technique could pick up genetic material from innocent transfer. However, the combination of DNA on both the murder weapon and a cigarette proved persuasive. Wasatch County Sheriff Todd Bonner spoke about the case with evident emotion. "It was haunting me my whole career. It doesn't matter that she was a street girl. This is a 17-year-old girl, a human being. I could care less what she did for a living." Crystal's stepfather, Jeff Beslanovich, attended the trial. After Simpson was convicted and sentenced to life, Jeff told reporters, "I'm glad they got him. It took a long time, but this guy deserves to sit in a cell for the rest of his life." Joseph Michael Simpson remains incarcerated in Utah, serving a life sentence. The case became notable in forensic science circles for demonstrating the power of touch DNA analysis. Yet another case would reveal how perpetrators sometimes inserted themselves into investigations. Anna Kane. On October 23, 1988, the body of 26-year-old Anna Kane was discovered near Reading, Pennsylvania. She had been beaten and strangled, and baling twine had been tied around her neck. Anna had faced challenges in her life, but those who knew her understood she had been working to turn her life around. The Berks County investigation collected biological evidence from Anna's body and clothing, creating a DNA profile that would be stored for future analysis. Detectives interviewed people who had known Anna and tried to identify where she had been in the hours before her death. but leads proved difficult to develop. Then, in 1990, something unusual occurred. The Reading Eagle newspaper received a letter from someone claiming knowledge of Anna Kane's death. The letter contained specific details about the incident that had not been released to the public, suggesting the author had either witnessed it or committed it themselves. Investigators immediately recognized the potential value of the letter. The author had sealed the envelope and affixed a stamp, which meant they had likely licked both items, potentially leaving saliva containing DNA. Detectives carefully preserved the letter and envelope for future testing. The case remained unsolved through the 1990s and 2000s. The DNA profile from Anna's body and clothing sat in databases without generating matches, and the letter remained evidence waiting for the right technology. That technology arrived in 2022 when investigators partnered with Parabon Nano Labs. Forensic scientists extracted DNA from the saliva on the letter's envelope and stamp, then uploaded the genetic profile to genealogy databases. The DNA matched biological evidence from Anna's clothing, confirming the letter writer had indeed been the perpetrator. The genetic genealogy work identified the letter writer as Scott Grimm, a man who lived in the Hamburg area. Further investigation revealed that Grimm had been arrested in 2002 for harassment related to sending intimidating letters to others. Pennsylvania State Police Trooper Daniel Womer explained the significance. He stated, "Whoever wrote the letter to the newspaper actually was admitting that they committed the homicide. The letter had been both a taunt and an unwitting confession. However, the resolution came with a significant limitation. Scott Grimm had died in 2018 of natural causes, 4 years before investigators identified him. There would be no arrest, no trial, and no opportunity for Anna's family to confront him. Anna's daughter, Tamika Reyes, had been just a toddler when her mother died. Growing up without Anna had shaped her entire life. She shared her feelings publicly. I was happy to finally put a face behind the monster who took her from us, and upset that he will never be able to face consequences. No child should ever have to grow up without their mom." District Attorney John Adams acknowledged the frustration. "I know in some respects the fact that he is deceased, he will never face justice. But we solved it. We gave some closure to the family." If you've made it this far and enjoy deep dives into the most shocking criminal cases, hit that subscribe button and don't forget to press the bell icon. The pattern of perpetrators evading justice would continue, but technology was rapidly evolving. Karen Stitt. On the evening of September 3, 1982, 15-year-old Karen Stitt left her boyfriend's home in Sunnyvale, California, and began walking toward a bus stop that would take her back to her own residence. She never arrived home. The following morning, Karen's body was discovered concealed behind a wall, her wrists bound with her own shirt. She had been attacked and stabbed 59 times in what investigators characterized as a frenzied assault. The location where Karen was found suggested the perpetrator had deliberately hidden her body, attempting to delay its discovery. The Sunnyvale Department of Public Safety launched an intensive investigation. Detectives retraced her final movements, interviewing her boyfriend, family members, friends, and anyone who might have seen her on September 3rd. The bus stop where Karen had been heading was located in a relatively populated area. Yet no witnesses came forward who had observed her being approached or forced into a vehicle. The case remained cold until 2022, when advances in genetic genealogy provided a new avenue for investigation. Sunnyvale detectives partnered with genetic genealogists who uploaded the suspect's DNA profile to public genealogy databases. The search generated matches to individuals who shared genetic markers with the unknown suspect, allowing investigators to construct family trees. The genealogical work narrowed the investigation to 4 brothers living in the Fresno area. They focused on Gary Ramirez, who had been approximately 35 years old in 1982. By 2022, Ramirez had moved to Maui, Hawaii. Investigators obtained a DNA sample from one of Ramirez's children, which showed a high probability of relatedness to the crime scene DNA. Working with Hawaiian authorities, they obtained genetic material directly from Ramirez. The results came back positive. Gary Ramirez's DNA matched the profile from Karen's clothing and body. The arrest in 2022, 40 years after Karen's death, brought relief and anguish to her family. Santa Clara County District Attorney Jeff Rosen emphasized the persistence required. Behind every old murder file, there is a person, heartbreak, and a mystery. The mystery of Karen Stitt's death has been solved thanks to advances in forensic science and a detective that would never, ever give up. Deputy District Attorney Rob Baker addressed the strength of the case. After extensive investigation, we felt confident Gary was the source of the crime scene evidence. Rather than proceed to trial, Ramirez opted to enter a plea. In 2025, he pleaded no contest to first-degree murder, resulting in a sentence of life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years. At 78 years old at sentencing, Ramirez faced spending his remaining years in custody. Gary Ramirez remains incarcerated in California, while investigators in California celebrated that breakthrough. Another case would showcase the power of analyzing microscopic evidence. Stephanie Isaacson. On the morning of June 1st, 1989, 14-year-old Stephanie Isaacson left her Las Vegas home and began walking along a shortcut through an undeveloped sandlot area on her way to El Dorado High School. Stephanie never arrived at school. Her body was discovered later that day in the same sandlot, with her backpack lying nearby. Medical examiners determined that Stephanie had been abducted, attacked, beaten, and strangled. The Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department initiated a comprehensive investigation, processing the scene for evidence that might identify the perpetrator. In 1989, DNA technology was in its early stages, and forensic scientists required relatively large samples of biological material to generate usable genetic profiles. Investigators collected what evidence they could from the scene and from Stephanie's body. But the quantity of biological material available proved to be extremely limited. The case presented significant challenges from the outset. The sandlot location was not heavily trafficked, meaning few potential witnesses existed. Detectives interviewed students who walked similar routes to school, trying to establish whether anyone had noticed suspicious individuals in the area or vehicles that seemed out of place. One individual who came to investigators' attention was Darren Roy Marchand. In 1986, 3 years before Stephanie's death, Marchand had been arrested in connection with another strangulation case in Las Vegas, though those charges had ultimately been dismissed. The similarity in method raised questions about whether Marchand might be connected. But without physical evidence linking him to the crime scene, investigators could not pursue charges. The case went cold as leads were exhausted. In 1995, Darren Marchand died by his own hand, taking any knowledge of his involvement to his grave. For investigators, Marchand remained a theoretical suspect, but one they could neither confirm nor eliminate through the evidence available. The DNA evidence collected in 1989 remained preserved. But the quantity of genetic material was so small that it could not generate a usable profile using traditional technology. The breakthrough came in 2021, when Las Vegas detectives partnered with Othram Laboratories, a specialized forensic facility. The genetic material available from Stephanie's case measured just 0.12 nanograms, an extraordinarily small quantity that represented the smallest amount of DNA ever successfully used to solve a criminal case at that point in history. Othram scientists employed genome sequencing technology, a sophisticated process that could extract genetic information from samples far too small for traditional DNA profiling methods. The process was painstaking and required specialized equipment and expertise. But it successfully generated a genetic profile from evidence that every other laboratory had deemed too degraded for analysis. Once Othram created the DNA profile, investigators used genetic genealogy techniques to identify the source. The profile was uploaded to public genealogy databases, generating matches to individuals who shared genetic markers with the unknown suspect. This analysis pointed toward Darren Roy Marchand, confirming what Las Vegas investigators had long suspected. The identification provided closure for Stephanie's family, even though Marchand had been deceased for 26 years. Stephanie's mother released a statement expressing mixed emotions. She said, "I'm glad they found who murdered my daughter. I never believed the case would be solved. It's good to have some closure, but there's no justice for Stephanie at all." Othram CEO David Middleman spoke about the significance of the breakthrough. This was a huge milestone. When you can access information from such a small amount of DNA, it really opens up the opportunity to so many other cases. The technique has since been applied to numerous other cold cases where evidence was previously considered too degraded or insufficient for analysis. Across the Atlantic, another case would reveal how family connections could unexpectedly break open investigations. Melanie Road. In the early morning hours of June 9, 1984, 17-year-old Melanie Road left a nightclub in Bath, England, and began walking home. She never arrived. The following morning, a milkman discovered Melanie's body near a row of garages close to her residence. She had been attacked, stabbed 26 times, including 8 wounds to her chest, and evidence indicated she had been pursued approximately 30 meters during the assault. The ferocity of the attack suggested extreme rage or determination to prevent Melanie from escaping. The Avon and Somerset Constabulary launched an extensive investigation. Detectives established that she had been walking home alone after spending the evening with friends at the nightclub. The route she took was one she had walked before, through familiar streets in her own neighborhood. The fact that the attack occurred so close to her home made the incident particularly disturbing. Forensic technicians processed the scene thoroughly, collecting biological evidence from Melanie's body and clothing. The stab wounds indicated the use of a knife or similar sharp implement, and the number of wounds suggested the attack had continued well beyond what was necessary to cause death. Medical examiners documented defensive injuries, showing Melanie had fought desperately against her attacker before being overwhelmed. The investigation in 1984 followed traditional methods, with police interviewing hundreds of people who had been in the area that night. Detectives checked alibis for known offenders and developed profiles of potential suspects based on the nature of the incident. However, despite extensive efforts, no clear suspect emerged. The case went cold as leads were exhausted and investigators had nowhere left to turn. The breakthrough came in 2015 through an unexpected route. A young woman was cautioned by police for a minor offense, and as part of standard procedure, her DNA was collected and entered into the database. The database system identified her DNA as a familial match to the unknown suspect in Melanie Road's murder, meaning she shared enough genetic markers to be a close relative, specifically, a daughter. Investigators immediately recognized the significance of this match. The young woman had no involvement in Melanie's death, but her DNA indicated her father would match the profile from the crime scene. Detectives identified the woman's father as Christopher Hampton, who had been 32 years old in 1984 and living in the Bristol area. Hampton had no prior convictions for serious offenses, and there was nothing in his background that would have brought him to investigators' attention during the original inquiry. To confirm the match, police approached Hampton and requested a voluntary DNA sample. Hampton provided the sample, which was analyzed and confirmed as a match to the biological evidence from Melanie's murder scene. Faced with the irrefutable scientific evidence, Hampton was arrested and charged with murder. The case proceeded to trial in 2016. However, on the first day of proceedings, Hampton changed his plea to guilty, acknowledging his responsibility for Melanie's death. The prosecution presented evidence about the attack and its aftermath. The judge characterized the incident as motivated by gratification and noted the callous nature of the assault. During sentencing, Justice Popplewell addressed Hampton directly, stating, "You will very likely die in prison." Hampton received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years before he would be eligible for parole consideration. At 64 years old at the time of sentencing, the lengthy minimum term meant Hampton would be in his 80s before any possibility of release. But the most groundbreaking case would involve not one victim, but two, and would pioneer a technique that changed criminal investigations forever. Linda Mann and Dawn Ashworth. On the evening of November 21, 1983, 15-year-old Linda Mann left her home in the village of Narborough, Leicestershire, to visit a friend. She never returned. The following morning, Linda's body was discovered on a footpath known as the Black Pad, a shortcut through the area. She had been attacked and strangled. Medical examiners recovered biological evidence from the scene that would eventually revolutionize criminal investigations worldwide. The Leicestershire Constabulary launched an investigation, but struggled to identify any clear suspects. The isolated location of the Black Pad meant few potential witnesses existed, and despite extensive inquiries, detectives could not develop strong leads. The case went cold, leaving Linda's family without answers and the community fearful that the perpetrator remained among them. Nearly 3 years later, on July 31, 1986, another 15-year-old girl named Dawn Ashworth disappeared while walking home from a friend's house in the nearby village of Enderby. Her body was discovered 2 days later, attacked and strangled in circumstances eerily similar to Linda Mann's death. Both girls had attended the same school, Brockington High School, and the proximity of the incidents suggested a connection. Forensic scientists examined biological evidence from both crime scenes and determined that the same individual had been responsible for both attacks. However, identifying that individual proved extraordinarily difficult using traditional investigative methods. In 1986, a 17-year-old local youth with learning difficulties was arrested and confessed to Dawn Ashworth's death. But he denied any involvement in Linda Mann's case. This is where the investigation took a revolutionary turn. Dr. Alec Jeffreys at the University of Leicester had recently developed a technique called DNA profiling, which could identify individuals based on their unique genetic markers. Police asked Dr. Jeffreys to analyze the biological evidence from both crime scenes and compare it to a sample from the confessor. The DNA analysis definitively proved that the same person had committed both crimes. But that person was not the youth who had confessed. The confession had been false, and the analysis had prevented a wrongful conviction while confirming the two cases were linked. With the confessor eliminated, but the perpetrator still unknown, Leicestershire police made a historic decision. They launched the world's first mass DNA screening, requesting voluntary samples from all adult males aged between 17 and 34 in the 3 villages of Narborough, Enderby, and Littlethorpe. Approximately 5,000 men came forward to provide samples, an unprecedented undertaking that required months to complete. Among those who should have been tested was Colin Pitchfork, a 27-year-old baker who worked at Hampshire Bakery and lived in the area. However, Pitchfork convinced a colleague, Ian Kelly, to impersonate him and provide a sample in his place. Kelly agreed and successfully submitted a sample under Pitchfork's name, allowing the actual perpetrator to evade detection through the mass screening. The deception might have succeeded indefinitely, but several months later, Ian Kelly made the mistake of discussing what he had done during a conversation with a colleague at the bakery where they worked, which was overheard by another woman. Another patron overheard the conversation and reported it to police. Detectives immediately arrested both Kelly and Pitchfork. When confronted, Pitchfork provided his own DNA sample, which matched the evidence from both crime scenes. During interrogation, Pitchfork confessed to both attacks. He told investigators about Dawn Ashworth. Opportunity. She was there, and I was there. His admission revealed a chilling opportunism. He had encountered both victims by chance and attacked them simply because the circumstances allowed it. In Linda Mann's case, he had left his infant son in his vehicle while committing the offense. In January 1988, Colin Pitchfork pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of assault, and 1 count of conspiracy to pervert the course of justice. He received a sentence of life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years, later reduced to 28 years on appeal. The Lord Chief Justice remarked during sentencing that there was doubt whether Pitchfork should ever be released. Pitchfork has made multiple subsequent attempts to secure release. In October 2025, the parole board denied his latest application, finding he still posed a risk. Dawn Ashworth's mother, Barbara Ashworth, expressed her continued opposition to any release. "Words fail me now. He seems to want to fight no matter what. He's killed 2 schoolgirls. I know what I'd do. I'd throw away the key." Colin Pitchfork remains incarcerated, with his next parole hearing scheduled for 2026. While that case pioneered DNA profiling in the United Kingdom, another would eventually become the oldest solved cold case in its jurisdiction. Nancy Benelak. On the night of October 25th into the early morning of October 26, 1970, 28-year-old Nancy Marie Benelak was alone in her Sacramento apartment. Nancy worked as a court reporter and was engaged to be married, with her future appearing bright and full of promise. Her fiancé had left around 11:30 in the evening after they had spent time together, and Nancy went to bed expecting an ordinary night. Instead, someone entered her apartment through the second-story balcony, using tape on their fingertips to avoid leaving fingerprints. The intruder made their way to Nancy's bedroom and launched a frenzied attack, stabbing her over 30 times with such force that she was nearly decapitated. Nancy fought desperately for her life, sustaining defensive wounds as she tried to fend off her attacker. During the struggle, the perpetrator cut himself, leaving a blood trail in the apartment. The next day, Nancy's friend and co-worker and the apartment manager discovered her body. The Sacramento County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene and began processing what appeared to be a particularly brutal incident. The use of tape on the perpetrator's fingers suggested premeditation and an attempt to avoid detection. The entry through the balcony indicated planning and possibly surveillance of Nancy's residence. Investigators collected the blood left by the perpetrator, carefully preserving it as evidence, even though DNA analysis would not become available for criminal investigations for another decade and a half. Detectives interviewed neighbors in the apartment complex, trying to establish whether anyone had seen suspicious individuals or noticed unusual activity around Nancy's unit. The investigation revealed that Nancy had a neighbor in the complex named Richard John Davis, who was 27 years old and whose apartment provided a view into Nancy's residence. However, in 1970, without DNA technology or other physical evidence definitively connecting Davis to the incident, investigators could not establish sufficient probable cause for an arrest. The case went cold. with Davis remaining a person of interest, but never charged. Over the following decades, Davis lived his life while Nancy's family endured the pain of her unsolved death. Davis struggled with alcoholism and died in 1997 from complications related to his drinking. The case remained Sacramento County's oldest unsolved homicide for more than 50 years. In 2004, advances in DNA technology allowed forensic scientists to extract a genetic profile from the blood the perpetrator had left in Nancy's apartment. The profile was entered into CODIS, but it returned no matches to any known offenders. The case remained unsolved, though the DNA evidence sat waiting for technology that could unlock its secrets. That technology arrived in the form of forensic genetic genealogy. In 2022, Sacramento County investigators partnered with genetic genealogists who uploaded the suspect's DNA profile to public databases. The search generated matches to relatives of the unknown suspect, allowing investigators to construct family trees. The genealogical work pointed directly to Richard John Davis, the same neighbor who had been suspected in 1970. The identification came 25 years after Davis's death, meaning he would never face trial for Nancy's murder. However, the scientific confirmation of his identity provided the closure Nancy's family had sought for 5 decades. Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert spoke about the resolution. Clearly, he intended to do what he did that day. Were he alive, I think we're talking premeditated murder. The proximity of Davis's apartment to Nancy's, combined with the evidence of planning and how he entered her residence, supported the conclusion that he had observed Nancy and planned the attack. Retired Detective Mickey Lynx, who had worked tirelessly on the case for years, received recognition for her dedication to finding answers. Nancy's sister Linda Cox wrote a letter expressing the family's gratitude. After almost 52 years of missing my sister, we owe Mickey Lynx so much gratitude. How many times my husband, Tom, and myself have said Nancy would love our ranch, all our animals and land with wide open spaces. We have missed sharing our children and grandchildren and so much more. Yet even that lengthy timeline would be surpassed by one final case. Margaret Peggy Beck. In August 1963, 16-year-old Margaret Beck, known to everyone as Peggy, traveled to the Flying G Ranch near Deckers, Colorado, to serve as a counselor at a Girl Scout summer camp. Peggy, from Edgewater, Colorado, had a deep love of animals and a protective nature toward her younger siblings. She was described by her family as loving and protective, someone who cherished the memories they created together. On the night of August 17th, Peggy slept in a tent at the camp. Her tent mate was in the infirmary due to illness, leaving Peggy alone in the tent. During the night, someone entered the tent and attacked Peggy. She was assaulted and strangled. The attack occurred in the midst of an active camp full of counselors and young participants, yet no one heard or saw anything unusual during the night. The following morning, when Peggy failed to appear for breakfast, her tent mate returned from the infirmary and discovered her body. The Jefferson County Sheriff's Office launched an investigation into what appeared to be an isolated attack at the summer camp. Detectives processed Peggy's tent and the surrounding area for evidence. Forensic technicians collected fingernail scrapings from Peggy's hands, hoping she had scratched her attacker during the struggle. However, in 1963, DNA analysis did not exist, and the biological evidence was preserved without any immediate investigative value. Investigators interviewed counselors, camp staff, and anyone who had been in the area during the relevant time frame. The remote location of the Flying G Ranch meant that whoever had attacked Peggy either worked at the camp, was staying there as a visitor, or had traveled specifically to the location. Detectives explored all possibilities, but could not identify a clear suspect. The case went cold, leaving Peggy's family without answers for more than 5 decades. As DNA technology developed through the 1980s and 90s, the biological evidence from Peggy's fingernail scrapings was analyzed. In 2007, forensic scientists successfully extracted a DNA profile from the scrapings and created a John Doe profile that was entered into CODIS. The profile sat in databases for years without matching any known offenders, representing an unidentified perpetrator who had evaded justice for decades. The case remained unsolved until 2019, when Jefferson County investigators partnered with genetic genealogy specialists. The DNA profile was refined and submitted for genetic genealogy testing through United Data Connect, a Denver-based company. The genealogical work identified James Raymond Taylor as the source of the DNA, making this the oldest cold case solved through genetic genealogy at that time. 56 years after the crime, James Raymond Taylor had been born on December 22, 1939, making him 23 years old in August 1963 when Peggy was killed. Taylor worked as a television repairman in Edgewater and was married at the time of the offense. Investigators discovered that Taylor had interests in ham radio testing, which sometimes took him to remote areas for equipment checks. This hobby may have brought him to the vicinity of the Flying G Ranch, though the exact circumstances of how he encountered Peggy remained unclear. In 2020, Jefferson County authorities issued an arrest warrant for James Raymond Taylor for Peggy Beck's murder. However, there was a significant problem. Taylor's whereabouts were unknown. The last confirmed sighting of him had been in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1976. Whether Taylor had died in the intervening 44 years or was still alive somewhere remained a mystery. Jefferson County Sheriff Jeff Schrader expressed the department's frustration at being unable to locate Taylor. "Nothing would give us greater pleasure than to actually put handcuffs on James Taylor." The sheriff's statement reflected the desire to bring Taylor to justice, not just for the resolution of the case, but to allow Peggy's family to see the perpetrator face accountability. Investigator Elias Alberti added, "We have spent several months searching for James Taylor, with no luck. We have no idea where he's at." The search for Taylor has included checking death records, following leads about possible locations, and attempting to trace any family members who might know his whereabouts. As of December 2025, Taylor would be 86 years old, if still alive. Peggy Beck's family released a statement through investigators that was read at the press conference announcing the identification. The statement honored Peggy's memory. "She was loving and protective of her family, and we will cherish the memories we have of her forever." For Peggy's relatives, the identification of Taylor provided some answers after 57 years, even if his unknown whereabouts prevented full closure. The case was the oldest cold case solved through genetic genealogy at the time of its resolution, though it has since been surpassed by older cases such as the 1956 murder of Patricia Kalitsky and Dwayne Bogle, solved in 2021. This was all from our side today. Thanks for watching. Click here to check out another video.